it's a very intriguing concept, what Adam Trombly has placed before us, because I believe Tesla's special generator satisfies all the criteria of what Adam describes. The proper introduction, let's see if I'm quoting him correctly, the proper introduction of a heterodyning or standing, he's mixed them equivalent wave into a resonant domain. Now, usually I think of a standing wave as a wave with boundaries whose length is the same as the wave, and so it appears to be standing still, even though it's still moving. What, though, if a standing wave is standing because it has nowhere to go? Oh, well, that's what a standing wave does. Okay. What if a standing wave is standing because it's frozen in place? Now, he told Brian Strom that the disks become saturated with current. That sounds like a standing wave. Yet, the voltage component, or the magnetic, I should say, may not be standing because it went into a resonant domain, namely the magnetic sink of the iron. Tesla did something interesting. You know, it's funny, we think it's a mystery, but the clues are right there. One of Tesla's patents, dating from around the 1890s, has to do with a transformer that is very intriguing because it literally provides the information to satisfy the story of Patrick Kelly at his website, that some people have figured out how to monkey with the power factor between a motor and a generator and make them a closed-loop system. So, Tesla's invention has to do with a transformer placing a magnetic membrane between the primary and the secondary of the right thickness, or thinness if you prefer, such that the wave, the AC wave in either case, becomes retarded such that you're monkeying with the power factor. In fact, Tesla claimed 90 degrees out of phase, which sounds like a standing wave. No, it sounds worse. It sounds like a cancelled wave. Okay, considering that patents are designed to lead us astray, a standing wave would be 180 degrees out of phase, wouldn't it? Right, 180 degrees out of phase, wouldn't it? Because it has to bounce back inverted. No, I'm not so sure now. Wait, let me think about this. I won't think too much. 90 degrees out of phase. Why would Tesla say that? But he says that when you do something, you use the quarter wave. I guess I'm going to have to think about that some more. Anyway, that's a detail. The point is, you're monkeying with the power factor. And that's exactly what William Lyne said he managed to do with those two little electromechanical watt-hour meters. So Tesla says how to do it by the proper construction of a transformer. Now, we know from William Lyne's story that for every 200 pounds of iron added to the device, 1 horsepower is increased in its output. What if it's not merely the thickness of the membrane between the primary and the secondary, but it's the sink, the magnetic sink, the mass of iron, the massive quantity of iron that this shell or membrane is connected to, so that it can be the best of both worlds. It can allow, because see, Tesla said that it takes a certain length of time for the iron membrane to be saturated with the magnetic field from the primary to finally make its way to the secondary, and it's that time delay factor that creates the monkeying with the power factor. Now, since the voltage always gets ahead of the current, but I'm guessing it's the current that magnetizes the iron, not the voltage, as I used to think. What it means is oh dear. Well, forgetting about voltage getting ahead of the current. This merely slows down the current. So now the voltage is leading the current by whatever factor you want it to do. But if you've got a massive body of iron elsewhere connected to this membrane, you could monkey with the power factor to any degree you want. In fact, what if the current never catches up with the voltage? This is what I'm getting at. That means wherever the current came from, it remains saturated. It doesn't go anywhere. It was exactly what Adam Trombly said. And so the secret to Tesla's special generator is the iron chassis, because it's no longer an enclosure fully enclosing everything, but now it's a boundary between two different parts of the system. What two parts, I'm not sure yet. Because I thought the two coils were side by side surrounding whatever it is, the reciprocating piston or the two counter-rotating sets, stacked sets of homopolar discs. Because I'm still not sure I can work in unipolar into this. I mean, Adam Trombly says, well, Faraday knew about the unipolar disc, but it wasn't until recently, in the 1950s, that somebody had figured out it makes no difference whether it's unipolar or homopolar, you still get results. So nobody made the distinction. So it's not in our consciousness yet that we can make a distinction. So that part I have to leave off to one side. I can't deal with that yet. But the power factor seems to be, monkeying with the power factor seems to be an important feature of Tesla's special generator, because that's the definition for why a conductive disk can remain saturated, because it never catches up with the voltage. You know, it's bad enough when Tesla had the lineman throw the switch and the voltage got ahead of the current and killed the lineman. But I guess what he did was he decided he figured out how to sustain that lag. And by sustaining it, he's doing what Bedini does with transistors, because they didn't have transistors back then. Bedini gets a voltage spike and utilizes extremely little current. And it's the voltage spike that recharges the batteries, and the batteries run the system, and the system keeps running until the batteries get too old to keep running anymore, because they never get discharged. So Bedini is replicating what Tesla did, but in a different way, by creating that power factor, that difference, that lag in which the current lags behind the voltage. Now, if it can be made that the current always lags behind the voltage, that's because the load never surpasses the lag. It never corrects the lag, so that the motor always falls behind draining the source. It can't keep up with draining the source. The source always stays ahead of the load. Everything has its limits, so, you know, this is not infinity we're talking about. But if you design a closed system such that the load can never drain the source, then you've got, for all practical purposes, infinite power coming from the source, so long as the source keeps supplying it. The load can never drain it. So it's just a question of keeping the source going. And of course, in the case of electro U-boat, yeah, well, the liquefied air is going to run out, and then you won't have compressed air to run the generator. So it's not perpetual. But, just with regard to the relationship between the generator and the motor driving the propellers on the back end of the electro U-boat, their relationship is perpetual if they ignore everything else, such as the source of the compressed air in the first place. This is why we can't call these machines perpetual motion just so that we can criticize them, because that's erroneous on our part to even call them perpetual motion. You got to. How far back do you want to go before or how far back do you want to avoid going so as to be able to call something perpetual motion? I think, come on, it's kind of ridiculous. Anyway. So that's what Adam Trombly was talking about, and we're given the secret in that patent. And I downloaded it, but I can't remember the date, can't remember the number, somewhere in the 1890s, I think. And it has to do with a transformer. And it's funny, it's listed right there on Wikipedia. But of course, who knows about William Lyne's story or to connect the two? But I keep looking for the nexus to this thing. But I guess I thought a tornado was a good way to go about it. And it might be a nice feature of the thing, Obviously, Tesla went about it in multifarious ways to improve efficiency. And a tornado concept is probably one of them. But it's not the crux of it. I've always felt the iron was the crux of it. And that's why I spent so much time creating a website describing my experimentation into the nature of iron, like a method actor trying to get in touch with its character firsthand, biologically, between me and it. earthinglife.info. Submitted a provisional patent. It expired because I couldn't find anybody to buy it, but because it would take a shamanistic diviner's physiology to, somebody electrosensitive to appreciate it, and who's into grounding, biologically grounding their body to the earth while they sleep at night. But it taught me something firsthand about iron, the significance. It's what I suspected, and it was the only thing I could do to study the watt-hour meter in hopes of understanding the Tesla special generator, because I was getting nowhere. Well, Adam Trombly has come to the rescue via Brian Strum, because he literally is providing the very vague abstraction that describes what this other patent of Tesla, this specialized transformer with the magnetic shielding or membrane between the primary and the secondary, is doing. It's satisfying the criteria of William Lyne's story. That aspect of his story that has to do with the iron chassis, the 200 pounds of iron versus one equivalent to 1 horsepower of output. And it's interesting because there's another patent I found that has to do with 150,000 kilocycles. 150,000 cycles alternator possible. Apparently, alternator is the equivalent term for the alternating current generator. They use a lot of alternative terms back then that we don't use now, so I had to look these things up. Like annular, A-N-N-U-L-A-R, means circular. Okay, or concentric, if you prefer, but no, circular. Radial still means radial, thank God. So he took this disk, which for all intents and purposes is a homopolar disk. I don't think they knew about unipolar back then. I don't know. It just looks like Tesla didn't know about unipolar. He didn't know everything, So he took this homopolar disk, made of copper, and with a saw created radial grooves into this. Now this is, and one little sentence in the patent gave away that the grooves made it possible for the current in this disk to go up one groove and down the next, right adjacent to it. That's exactly the flow pattern of current that Brian Strum demonstrated or described in one of his latest, because he made several different unipolar disc motors or generators, whatever. He described that current flow, and he patented it. And it was already patented by Tesla, that current flow. But Tesla just gave it one little line. Interesting. We've got two patents on the same basis. Because Brian Strom patented his device. Well, so did Tesla. And they both do the same thing. So we've got these grooves in a disc, and that's nice, but that's just a feature to improve things. Now, Tesla used a copper disc. So that must be where he used the copper? I don't know. I just assumed the copper was, you couldn't use copper in a machine because it would, rust, tarnish. You could only use bronze. That the only way you could use copper would be to insulate it as copper windings, or as a bronze piece that you want to be made out of copper. I thought you would make the disc out of aluminum because that's what he put, or that's what has been put in the water meter. Maybe that's a mistake. Maybe it was put there on mistake to monkey with the water meter to make sure it doesn't function properly. Maybe it's supposed to be copper because the whole point of the disc is that it be conductive. I didn't know this. I didn't know anything. Now, William Line says that aluminum is reflective, like a parabolic dish. Radiation. So, apparently, and I used aluminum in my device, my provisional patent device, merely as a reflector. Okay. Not as a conductor. So, it's wrong for me to assume that everything about the electromechanical water ammeter is valid to take literally. It's not. It's William Line said it was demoted or demoralized, deformed. It's a deformed version of the Tesla special generator. Okay, so it's deformed. So the rotating disc in that water ammeter should be copper, just like Tesla put in his patent of the grooved disc in his 150,000 cycles per second alternator. Because he was dealing with the problem of pole pieces. How many pole pieces can you put in a motor or generator without magnetic leakage between the pole pieces? And he figured out how to get around that problem. And it's a very intriguing patent if you read the patent. It took me a while to read it and to make out the drawings. I'm not very good at patent reading. But it's a simple device, so it didn't take too much to figure it out. At least the basics of it. And then I had to redraw the image because it wasn't drawn very nicely according to his, there's only two possibilities of how he did the grooves on that disc. He said they were done on either side and they're either syncopated relative to each other or they match each other. And I ended up deciding they match each other. Syncopation doesn't work because of how he arranges it with the pole pieces of his surrounding electromagnet, the core, the core pieces, the core faces of the core of what you could almost call it no, it's not a transformer. It's just an energized core that charges up this copper grooved disc. Anywho, but again, that's just a feature that can enhance things if you know how to use all these things. So where does the aluminum go? So far, I don't know. It's pixie dust as the air blows in vortexial fashion to spin these copper discs. That's the other thing. How do I... See, there's still logistics on... Okay, now what do I do? Oh, brother. Unless the reciprocating piston... See, these copper-etched discs in his 150,000 cycles per second alternator had a big hole in the middle. It needed it. And so the copper disc was not solid. The hub, or hole, was quite large. Very large, because he had to put the energizer coils for the magnetic core that will energize this copper disc in the center of that copper disc. in the hollowed out center. So it had a very big opening in the middle. So it was more like a ring or one of these frisbees that are a flat disc with a big hole in the middle, basically. So where am I now? So he had his axle through that hole too. Well, what if we put the reciprocating piston going through that hole, going through the center of that rotating disc? Oh my God. I got this wire that was copper-clad aluminum because it's audio wire, high-fidelity wire, because they know that the electricity wants to travel in a spiral path along the perimeter of that wire, not along its core. And so they encourage it by having something that's of greater, or excuse me, lesser resistance for conductive flow going around the periphery, as opposed to the aluminum in the center, the copper around the periphery. And as an alternative, you can have silver-clad copper wire that will do the same thing. So we could have a barrel made of one material, either aluminum or copper, and discs extending into it from the inside of its perimeter, made of the other material. Depending on how we would do this, where do we want the reflectivity to occur, and where we want the conductivity to occur, because this is diamagnetic versus paramagnetic, attraction of magnetic force versus repulsion. So we can sculpt, in a sense, how the magnetic lines of force, if there are such things, should be shaped. So iron's not the only way to shape a magnetic force, magnetizable iron, but it will soak it up. Well, if copper attracts it, it does more than that. It converts it into electricity. While iron does not convert it, it leaves it alone. So in a sense, you could say that iron and aluminum are the true opposites. And copper is a means of conversion. But it has to attract it in order to do that conversion. But iron doesn't attract it, though. Ah, that's right. But if it should receive it into its domain, it will retain it without converting it. Okay. So yeah, there's something about the geometry that's going to be involved in interacting the aluminum with the copper. But the main thing is what Adam Trombly said, introducing a heterodyning or standing wave into a resonant domain. And I believe I've figured out that Tesla has already provided us with the clue of that taking place in that specially made transformer with the iron membrane, or iron, what did you call it? Barrier? Magnetic shielding. Either a magnetic shielding or membrane in the alternative vernacular, either way. And I say this because if you've got this membrane between two different coils, it could be the voltage coil versus a current coil. You know, if we have coils set up to pick up the current from this special generator, and it's two coils, in other words, if it's two coils, then it's four coils, two sets of coils, each pair being one current coil and one voltage coil. And then you put your chassis in between so that you have, let's say, your current coil on the outside, maybe? No, that wouldn't make sense. Oh, the disc is the current coil. So you don't, oh. That means, oh my goodness, that means the chassis has to be underneath the coil of wire. I believe, isn't that what William Line told me to do? is to, that's right, to put the windings around the chassis. That's right. Okay, so the chassis leads away into a big sink of iron mass. And now you've got a variable membrane, which we don't vary the thickness, we just vary the mass that it's connected to vary how much lag we put between the copper disc on the inside. Oh, wait a minute, no, we have a copper coil on the outside. Oh, so if we have an aluminum drum on the inside to reflect back outwardly, then all of it goes to the copper winding. Yes, some of these older electromechanical water meters do not use a disc, they use a drum. And I wanted to buy one of them, but I didn't have the money, and so I never did buy it off of eBay. But it's very intriguing why the early ones, and this is older than the one I got. The oldest one I got was from 1910. But this older one for sale on eBay, I think it was from the 1890s. And it had a drum, an aluminum drum, rotating on the inside. And that brings to mind Jeffrey S. Miller saying that the iron core of a copper coil winding is best made out of an iron pipe with a slot down the side to, stop eddy currents, because it actually works better. It's more efficient than a solid iron core. So that's what we do surrounding this aluminum drum that spins. Now, how do we get it to spin? Well, William Line had it reciprocate, though. So it's a hollow piston that could reciprocate, conceivably. Yeah, Tesla had another patent called simply electric generator from 1894, January 2nd, I believe. And that had that was a reciprocating AC generator, run by compressed air, no doubt. So all these pieces are coming together. So we don't need a rotating tornado on the inside. We could do a reciprocating piston, just as William Lyne's story describes it as.